Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World. Later in the programme we'll look at the effects of the increasing price of oil. The controversial environmentalist Georges Monbiot will tell us why he's taken the decision now, with the Fukushima nuclear disaster worsening by the day, the decision now to embrace nuclear power. A big shock there. And I'll be joined by Hollywood heartthrob Matthew Fox and his equally glamorous co-star Olivia Williams. But we start with Libya and what appears to be a stalemate. NATO leaders have been meeting in Berlin, and the leaders of the US, Britain and France have vowed to continue the campaign until Colonel Gaddafi leaves. That's the plan. Leaves power and leaves. 3 weeks of NATO-led bombing has failed to get rid of Colonel Gaddafi, and this week the Swedish Foreign Minister Carl Bildt said that the decision by the US to withdraw its planes from the bombing missions has had a sizable impact on the operation. Sweden, you'll remember, is outside NATO, but is very much a part of this coalition. So, Mr. Bildt now joins us from Berlin. Carl, you've just said that the decision by the US to withdraw its planes from the bombing missions has had a sizable impact on the operation. What do you feel about it now? There are indications they may contribute some planes and so on, but it has had a big impact on affecting any form of direct victory, yes?
Well, it had a big impact. It should be said at the same time, of course, that in the beginning of their operation, that was the heavy phase, when it was a question of taking out all of the air defense assets of the Libyans and the Libyan Air Force and the air bases and things like that. And the Americans did a very, very substantial portion of that. That work is done. Now we need to maintain the military pressure on Gaddafi and continue to degrade his forces. And I hope that there will be also American contributions during this phase, whatever time it takes.
And in terms of the situation today, the word everybody uses is stalemate at the moment. Is it an equal stalemate, or has one of the two sides got an advantage at the moment? What do you feel, Carl?
Well, very difficult. I think it is a rather fluid situation. I mean, you can probably say that the Gaddafi forces, they are the more well-trained and they are the more well-armed. At the same time, on the political level, I mean, we have to assume that they are worried by the fact that they have a sizable portion of the population against them. So from the political point of view, clearly the opposition forces, the Benghazi and the INC, they have the advantage. Counter that, some of the military advantages of the Gaddafi side. Then on the international side, of course, we should not forget the effect of the sanctions. The fact that sanctions will be harder and harder, they will hit, and they will over time make it very difficult for Gaddafi to retain any sort of semblance of stability, any sort of semblance of control over the parts of Libya that he's still maintaining his grip on.
And in terms of the pressure now, is it necessary, very important now, for forces here to be reinforced by more, we mentioned it in passing, more US planes, more planes from other contributors to this international action? Do we need more planes in that setup?
Well, perhaps. I mean, that's for the military authorities to judge. But in my opinion, we need primarily to send the signals that we are going to go on. We have the will, we have the patience, we have the determination to continue. The military pressure will be there, whatever time it takes. The sanctions will continue to hit even harder. The political messages will be coming, and I think that might, at some point in time, cause the combination of all of these things, an implosion in Tripoli. What is worrying is, of course, that we must also provide the possibility for the humanitarian aid. I mean, there are people suffering heavily in Misrata and elsewhere, and we must support the work primarily of the different humanitarian agencies to help. Time is clearly not on the side of Gaddafi.
Not on the side of Gaddafi. Yet some people say that because he can hide his tanks and his trucks and so on, that the only way to defeat him would be to send in troops, that you can't do everything from the air, they say, and so on. Is there any possibility of sending in troops, any likelihood, or not?
No, I don't see that happening. But at the same time, I think you're correct. I mean, there are distinct limits to what you can do from the air. There might have been the belief by some in the beginning that a couple of airstrikes would do it. That is not the case. So you must see all of these different components of the strategy. The military pressure, critical. It does degrade his forces. It does limit his military options. It means that he can't move forward and threaten, say, Benghazi again. That is critically important. Then sanctions is sort of degrading him from other perspectives. Then the political message is degrading his power base in terms of the politics of it. All this taken together means very clearly that at some point in time, his side will crack and break and will go over into the not less demanding operation of trying to build a decent, good Libyan state and society.
And do you think, in fact, that the rebels should be helped with more weapons, with more armaments from the allies there? I mean, do you think that that would be a logical way of perhaps speeding up the process of a resolution vis-à-vis Gaddafi?
Yeah, I mean, you would have seen that there are different interpretations of the UN Security Council resolution. I would tend to say that sending in arms is contrary both to the spirit and the letter of the resolution, but I grant there are different interpretations. But even sending in arms, I mean, we shouldn't make any illusions, they need heavy arms. In order to operate heavy arms, you need training for quite some time. So just sending in heavy weapons doesn't really sort out the thing. That's why I'm stressing the different components of our strategy. And we must have an element of patience. This might not be resolved tomorrow, not even the day after tomorrow, but it will be resolved in the way that we are seeking to resolve it. I'm quite confident of that.
And do you think that a declaration, for instance, of a ceasefire would be enough to bring some form of peace? Or does the end of this procedure have to be really the departure of Colonel Gaddafi from power?
Well, it has to be the departure of Colonel Gaddafi from power, but there might well be a ceasefire before that. But a ceasefire will have to be verified. He will have to withdraw his forces from quite a number of areas that he's been occupying. But if that happens, of course, a ceasefire will take it into a political stage, and that political stage must mean also the withdrawal, the disappearance of Colonel Gaddafi. He doesn't have any future in the politics of Libya. I think there are also people very close to him that does understand this as things are now.
And how close, you're very, very much involved in this current campaign, but how close are Sweden, do you think, to joining NATO themselves? Close?
Yeah. No, we aren't there. We aren't there, and it's not really an issue on the table. But as you can see, both from what we're doing in Afghanistan, prior to that Kosovo, now Libya, we have a very, very close partnership with NATO, and we operate well together in the operations that are these particular cases under UN Security Council mandates, and we provide very sort of qualitative, highly sophisticated assets to the NATO operations, and we are happy with that.
And you're in a very, very important and central position of knowing exactly what's going on. Are you satisfied with progress at the moment, or has it been slower than you would have wished?
Well, it is nearly 3 months since the revolution, rebellion, whatever you prefer to call it, started in Benghazi. And I have to confess to you that I suspected at the time, I believed at the time it would be over in a week or two, that the regime would simply crack up and we would be in a transition stage, an advanced transition stage by now. It has taken longer time, no question about that. And there were those who might have believed that a couple of days of air campaign would do it. I didn't really believe that. I do think you have to look at the time perspective, but if you add up the different components, I'm quite certain that we will have the desired outcome. If you ask me about how long it will take, I wouldn't know. I would be prepared for quite some time yet to come.
Well, thank you very much for bringing us up to date, Carl, in that way, which we appreciate, and we hope we'll be talking about the end of this particular struggle in our next conversation. But in any case, thanks very much.
Hope so as well, David. Yeah.
And now, mixed messages on the price of oil, which this week nudged $125 a barrel. One Japanese bank, Nomura, has warned that we might expect the price to zoom over the $200 a barrel mark. But then again, Goldman Sachs, another famous name, this week urged people to sell their holdings, expecting the price of oil to begin a fall. Mixed messages too from the euro, where in the aftermath of the Portuguese bailout, some are predicting a contagion soon to affect Spain and possibly even kill the euro currency once and for all. But from Eurozone finance ministers we hear confidence and indeed even some optimism. So, what's going on in the financial world and how might it affect us, all of us? I'm joined now by Charlie Parker, a famous name, both his namesake and as the editor of Citywire. Starting right here and so on, and where does it stand to you, the predictions about the oil price now? Which way do you think it's going to go?
I think probably we're at the upper range of where we're going to be for some time. The oil price has been rising on the back of the political tension in the Middle East. I think as the sort of sense that perhaps the contagion isn't spreading throughout the region builds, we're going to see a little drop back down. But there's still some pretty fundamental things keeping the price of oil very high, not least the fact that Asia is booming and consuming ever more oil.
Yeah, so that's a big factor. And the other factor, obviously, is when the headlines are spreading doom and gloom, and the oil price does go up in those circumstances.
Well, that's right. I mean, the oil price is a function not just of demand in the global economy, it's also a function of fear. And, you know, what we've seen in the last week or so has been how powerful a little bit of fear can move the oil price at the moment. That Goldman Sachs prediction sent the price of oil down almost $4 on the moment it landed. It's a 2 or 3 paragraph note this bank bumped out, had a massive impact. And that's a reflection of just how volatile the oil price is at the moment and how worried people are about where it will end up with the situation in the Middle East.
Yeah, and in a year's time, what would you expect it to be, higher than now or lower than now? Or exactly the same?
Well, most people's sort of core estimate is that the oil price will be somewhere around $95 a barrel in a year's time. It's about $125 a barrel right now. Certainly, if it stayed at $125 for the whole of this year and possibly into next year, that's the point at which you start to say, gosh, this could really, really halt global growth. What we're doing is pumping money into oil exporting countries that don't want to spend that money, just when we're trying to keep demand going in the global economy.
Oh, yes. Ironic. And OPEC, now, OPEC was the big bear back in the 70s or 80s. How powerful is it today? Less powerful, is it?
Well, OPEC countries still have enough oil in reserves, enough they're not using every day, that they could significantly move the price of oil in the short term. But they are also battling longer-term factors like the growth of Asia and the fact that other parts of the world not part of OPEC, like Latin America, are gaining strength. So yes, they can move the price of oil, but they probably can't set the price of oil at a specific level in the long term anymore.
And what about the Eurozone area? I mean, are you expecting some more bad news about the euro?
You know, it depends who you are. If you're an economist, you look at the numbers and you say this just can't possibly add up. You know, why on earth isn't the Greek government, why on earth isn't the Irish government just defaulting? They're never going to be able to afford to pay the interest rates the market is demanding. The problem is the politicians are absolutely determined to save the euro, and they are not going to let these countries run out of money. They do not want to be the generation of European politicians that kills the single currency. And I think whatever the economics says, they're going to keep the thing afloat for as long as they possibly can.
But in Germany, from Germany, we hear rumours that the sort of impatience with the euro is growing there, and that it's vaguely possible that Germany might give it all up and get out of the euro. Is that possible?
Well, German politicians have to maintain the confidence of their population like anybody else, and the German people are going to be paying a fortune in the years to come to keep this project together. Now, it's entirely possible to speculate that the political necessity may be that they let some of these smaller European countries go, that they simply say, look, maybe we don't need one currency, maybe we need two, maybe we need a sort of a southern euro for these basket cases economies that can't get their act together, and a northern euro to cover places like France and Germany, which want more fiscal discipline. But I think it's still a tail risk. I think Germany knows that the sheer amount of chaos that would be caused by the euro disintegrating would just be massive and could be significant enough even to slow down the booming German economy.
Even slow that down as well.
Well, you have to think about just the disorder. Every European country will have to rebuild its central bank. I mean, it's just going to be chaos on markets. And that's going to create such a sense of panic, I think, if it does happen. In the short term, that it would be disastrous for the whole of the European area in terms of the money coming in from America and Asia and other places to fund their projects.
So in a year's time and so on, I mean, will the membership of the euro be different? More countries, less countries?
I think in a year's time it will probably be the same. I think the broader question is, over the next 5 or 10 years, as they start to plan for the long term, are they going to ultimately say, is there an orderly way to unwind this project? I mean, there cannot have been a clearer demonstration of the fact that the economics are not adding up. And I think, that is going to mean that over the slightly medium term, there are going to be lots of questions asked about the unwinding of the project. I think it's very, very unlikely they're going to go for some quick, sharp, let's kill this project, not just because of the political will invested. I mean, it would be the death of so many significant politicians in Europe, but also because of the market chaos it would cause.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlie. Whilst the eyes of the world are on countries like Libya, Syria and Yemen, Iraq has also been having its own protests since late February. Unlike elsewhere, though, Iraqis are not seeking regime change, but want more jobs, less corruption, a better standard of living, and in lots of areas, I suppose, more security too. Meanwhile, America is due to withdraw all its troops by December, but some say the country's not ready for that yet. So is it? Well, I'm joined right now by the UN's Special Representative in Iraq, Ad Melkert, who's just produced his latest of the 3 times a year reports on the situation. How is the situation right now? I mean, what is life like now for the Iraqis? Good? Better? Not good enough?
Not good enough and better at the same time. Better when one compares with some years ago when there was really bloodshed all over the place. Although still the average number of incidents per day is certainly abnormal, but it is getting better. I mean, there are 25 incidents per day
in the whole country.
In the whole country, and that is certainly not a situation that one would like to see in future. But the Iraqi security forces are imposing themselves more. The government, after a long time of government formation and after successful elections, is in place and now tries to put an emergency program together in order to respond also to the demonstrations that you mentioned. Still remains to be seen how effective that can be. It's probably the toughest challenge ahead. And then with the American troops withdrawing on the basis of the schedule that is out there, it's definitely, Iraq is definitely entering a new stage, but also a stage as a leader in the Arab world. They are chairing the Arab League at this moment, and somehow they offer a better potential than one sees in other countries. So it's a mixed bag, really.
A mixed bag, really. And in terms of people leading safe lives or lives not worried by the number of explosions or whatever in the course of a day and so on. And I mean, in your case, I mean, you were nearly killed by a bomb, weren't you?
Well, we were pretty close, yeah, in Najaf in October last year. But I always thought, even at that time, of the many Iraqis that did not survive in many places. And it shows that rebuilding a country really can come at a price to many people, and yet there are many people that want to take that risk because there's a strong motivation with the overwhelming majority of the Iraqis to get back to normal.
In retrospect, looking back, the big mistake was really the Allies being understaffed after the war was technically won.
Well, I think that there's consensus that there was no plan for after the invasion, and that it took the international community a long time to get the kind of support in place, including reconstructing the fabric, so to speak, of Iraqi governance. Now that is certainly in better shape, although there are still capacity shortages in many areas. But increasingly, Iraqis show determination to govern, to be more effective. Investors are certainly more interested, particularly in the northern part of the country. The oil industry is picking up, although still a long way to go.
And you were mentioning there about, of course, the Americans due to leave in December and so on and so forth. Now, Secretary Gates has made comments recently that maybe the Americans, or some of the Americans, should stay on. Could that happen? Should that happen?
Well, you know, from the UN side, we cannot and should not take a position there, because this is really a bilateral matter between the Iraqi government and the US government. Clearly, it's a controversial issue in Iraq itself, and importantly, from an international point of view, it is very necessary to look at the implications for the stability of the country, particularly in the north, where there are disputed boundaries in areas claimed by the Arab side or the Kurdish side. And that is something that is of concern to us also as UN, to see how with the Iraqi army, but also with the Kurdish Peshmerga forces, something can be maintained that was progress over the past few years with a so-called combined security mechanism overseen by the Americans. This obviously is going to change, and we're looking now as to how we can make our contribution also to have a kind of international engagement in place in order to avoid that things would run out of hand there in future.
And in terms of the pressures on the area, do you think that the insurgents are almost defeated, or could rise again? Pray God not. But
it's difficult to say. I mean, there's still multiple sources of potential violence around, and as I said, we also see it on an everyday basis. It may be on the decline. There certainly may be also an impact from what's happening elsewhere in the region, because I think many countries are now very much focused also on their own business, which may leave Iraq also a bit more to its own business, because there was a lot of interference from many sides. And perhaps that offers the space and the opportunity for Iraq to show that it's already one stage ahead, after the constitution, after elections, now trying to put the policies in place that are important for the people.
You're right. So in a sense, you're saying it is indeed what you've just produced is a progress report rather than a lack of progress report. Things are getting better, are they?
Yeah, I'm always very cautious about that, because setbacks are looming everywhere. But when one really takes a longer term look, I think one can be cautiously optimistic about what's going on.
Good news. Ad, thank you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
And now in a minute, two of the world's best known actors come together for a two-hander play, that's during the week, and a two-hander interview, that's here, after this break.